Welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Munce. On this episode, I will be discussing the topics of health, happiness, and balance for the choral director. I've recorded 3 separate segments, one on health, one on happiness, and one on balance, featuring an interview with my balance, my wife, Beth, who's going to give me a little bit of a reality check on whether or not I'm balanced. So we'll have a chance to hear that all in the upcoming episode. Episode 1 of the show is brought to you by Sight Reading Factory. SightReadingFactory.com is an awesome resource for teaching music literacy and so much more, as I'll talk to you about as the episodes go along. But I'm really excited to have them on board as the first sponsor of this show. You'll be able to get yourself a 10% discount at SightReadingFactory.com by putting in the promo code Choralosophy when you make your next purchase, or when you make your first purchase, hopefully, and start to discover the benefits of teaching sight reading every day at the click of a finger. My efforts at Choralosophy Podcast are also supported by Ryan Main. RyanMain.com is the website where you can find Ryan's self-published pieces whose music is a godsend for teachers. If you've not yet found Ryan, head over to RyanMain.com. Every time I've tried one of his pieces, I find that the kids buy in right away, but then they aren't bored later. And you guys all know that that's a rare combo. If it's fluffy enough to sound good in September when they first sight read it, then oftentimes they're bored in October. But with some of your choirs, they haven't bought in yet enough to have that kind of patience. Well, that's not an issue with the pieces of Ryan's that I've tried. The kids loved it right away and still loved it at the performance. It has that staying power. So you really need to go check out his stuff. You can also use Choralosophy there as the code at checkout for a 10% discount on each of the licensed PDFs you select. This episode might not be as choir specific as some of the other ones will be. I chose this as the first episode, though, because I think it's going to give you some insight into me as the host of this show and where I'm coming from philosophically. You can already see that philosophy is built right into the title of this show. I plan on discussing all of the topics that I choose for the show within the framework of a search for the why and the how and the study of choral music as a science. So this first episode is designed to do 2 things, hopefully to give you some ideas that are helpful to you when you think about your own life and health and your happiness and your balance. But it's also to help you as the audience get to know who I am and where I come from and what motivates me to search truth and search knowledge in my profession. So the topic of this episode of the podcast is health, happiness, and balance for the choral director. However, I chose that title in that order because I thought it sounded catchy, but I don't actually want to discuss those topics in that order. We're going to start with happiness. The first thing that comes to my mind on the topic of what it means to be happy is that we don't have a very good, in my opinion, working definition of what it actually means to be happy. Those of you who work with teenagers, which is a good portion of those of you listening, I would venture to guess. We work with teenagers, and we hear this a lot lately. It has become a major focus, at least where I am, in our music education, just education world in general, which is to try to improve the mental health and happiness level of our kids. Our school district is very focused on this, and I think rightly so. My issue comes in with how we define happiness and how we teach kids how to achieve it. I think that always seems very nebulous to me. I don't ever get what seems to be a concrete definition that we all could agree on what happiness actually is. And so I was feeling a couple months ago, feeling kind of down in the dumps about this topic, only because I felt like I had this passion to communicate these things to kids, but I didn't have a mechanism through the school to do it. And so I, of course, did what lots of people do when they want to say something to the world that will probably not be received at all, and that's to shout into the canyon that is Twitter. So I went on my Twitter and I put up a big long thread geared towards happiness related to the teenager. But then when I was putting together this podcast episode, I thought, we're not all that different. Us as adults and teachers, it starts as a teenager, as the risk for mental health issues and suicide and other types of issues starts to climb at that age. But ultimately, they are the same skill set in my mind that teenagers need to learn, that we as adults trying to balance our life, balance our career, our families, all of those things have to learn. So I'd like to share some of those thoughts. First, I don't claim that this thread or this podcast episode on the Twitter thread or the episode will contain the solution for you. That's not what I'm here to do. It's simply to give my thoughts about some things that I think a lot of people miss as it relates to what it takes to be happy. How do you maintain true happiness? There are many possible factors that could contribute, obviously, to someone's mental health and to their happiness as it relates to balancing their life and their career. My personal story is that I've been impacted by a teen suicide that hit me really hard a few years back. One of my private voice students and chamber choir students at the high school that we lost with what seemed like absolutely no warning, that a student, a child, would take his own life. And so it made me really rethink my ideas about what a happy person looks like, because in that case, everybody thought he was happy. So I did some soul searching and some digging, a lot of reading of philosophers and their descriptions of what the inner workings of the human mind and soul are as it relates to this topic. But the first thing I came up with was that oftentimes people can seem happy, but if they're putting on a face for you, if they are hurting themselves, heaven forbid, then you aren't seeing happiness. You might be seeing a momentary fun or pleasure, but that's not real, long-lasting happiness. And my first challenge to you would be to think about that in your own lives. Could you make a distinction? Are there areas in your life where you could make a distinction between a very deep, settled, peaceful happiness and filling your time with things that are fun and pleasurable? Because the first thing I would submit to you is that those are not the same thing. And I think we need to teach kids and ourselves how these aren't the same thing, and that we need to learn how to draw lines between them. There's nothing wrong with fun and pleasure. Absolutely nothing wrong. But we need to understand that that is not the same thing as happiness. In fact, I don't think that people who become happy by sheer luck, worshiping their whims, they never stay that way. They don't ever stay happy. The classical example is lottery winners, right? Of course, that's not a 100% statement, in the sense that there are probably some lottery winners out there that hit the jackpot, managed their money really well, left a legacy, did good in the world, used those resources to improve their overall state of being in the world, and felt really good about it on their deathbed. I'm sure those do exist, but we all know the other side of that coin, which is squandered resources, jealousy in their personal lives, people pulling at them from all different directions. They become miserable, sometimes broke. Using that as an example of, if your happiness comes to you without intentionality, then oftentimes it'll be fleeting. I think true happiness requires years of work. It's a process. So I'm going to give you some steps. And again, I don't speak on this as a psychologist or a guru, but I do speak to you as somebody who is, I genuinely believe, in a way that is not blowing smoke to try to impress you in my first podcast episode, but I'm a really happy person. I can hit some pretty major snags in my life and have it not cause me to stop loving my life. So if that is something that you would like to achieve with your career and your life, then I've got some suggestions. And these are things that I've worked on really hard. They're not things that I came to by luck. They're things that I came to by, again, reading the great minds who think about how people think, the metacognition, the introspection, all of those types of things that make you think about who you are. So here's my step one. List out all of your values. And that can take some people years. And I actually mean write it down. If you're a mental list keeper, okay, the writing it down is optional. You don't have to write it down if you don't want to. This is not homework. There will not be a test. But bottom line, make a list of all of your values. If you're a young person, this could look like your dream life. And that's okay. If you're, say, under 25, and you're still at the point where you are working towards kind of a first goal, maybe that's the first job, the first choral program for you that is something that you would be proud to take out in public. Maybe that's the goal for you in the short term. And so don't be afraid to line out what would be the dream life. But here's what I would encourage you to do. Do not include in that list the quote, perfect job, or the house you want to live in, or an income level. In other words, think, what do I want to achieve? Not what do I want to obtain. Those are two different things in my mind. What do you want your life to feel like more than what do you want your life to look like? And so if you have that framework for your thought process as you're putting together your list of values, that's going to be a really important part of that first step. Step 2, arrange your values in priority from top to bottom. And here's what that means. There have to be things on your list that you would not give up even for other things on your list. Now, this is an important caveat. Can your list change over time? Absolutely. In fact, I would worry about you if it didn't. In other words, if you are the same person at age 15 as you are at 25, in other words, the same things are important to you to the same degree, then I would be a little bit worried about whether or not you're growing. In the same sense that if you're 25 and you get to 35 and nothing's changed, I would be a little worried. In fact, it's something that I hear people brag about, and I don't say anything because I don't want to be rude, but what I'm saying on the inside is, did you really just brag about being the same person you were 15 years ago? That to me is not an accomplishment. That's stagnation. So I think what you're doing in step 2 here is you're arranging your priorities in such a way that if you had something at the top of your list and you had to choose, and this is the thought exercise that you go through while doing it. You put yourself through these little mental scenarios where you're thinking, if I had to choose between value number 1 on my list and value number 3, and I was forced to make a choice that I could only have one, would value number 1 be my choice? Would I give up value number 3 to keep value number 1? And if the answer is no, then you've got to switch them. In other words, there has to be something that would be an overarching value for you in your life. And when I say value, just so if you're not familiar with how this term is oftentimes used in philosophical discourse, is things or, and when I say things, I don't mean material value or material things, but anything that you could name or describe that you derive your happiness from, your achievement from, and I'll give you some examples that I think would make it easier for my own life. First thing I will share with you as you go throughout this podcast, you're going to get to know me pretty darn well through this process. And as people come on and join me as guests on the show, they're going to get to know me pretty well too, because it's hard for me to separate my thoughts from myself. So what I'll tell you is I am a person who believes in God, but when I formulate my values, I don't, like I was taught as a child, put God first, right? Well, I don't think of it that way, and let me explain why. To me, that's not how God works. God permeates all things, and so I think we get ourselves into trouble if we put a list together of our values where there is God occupying one spot, maybe at the top of the list, which then sends a subconscious message, at least to me, that then after that on the list, God's not a part of that. So to me, I don't include that. So for those of you who are religious and you hear me make my list here in a second, and God's not at the top, I don't want to offend you. Of course, if you're a person who doesn't believe in God at all, I think that also allows this system, this idea of arranging your values to still work. I think that if you are an atheist or if you are an agnostic, then none of these moral values that you might arrange are dependent on religion. So that's a caveat, and I want to share that with you just so that you know kind of how that I have thought through that, and that I have a kind of a sense of reason for how I put my list together. And you could of course choose to do yours in a different way or have a different philosophy, but I still think it's important. So for me, my first value, my prime value in my life, is being a husband and a father. There is nothing more important to me than that. In other words, if I had to choose between being a choral director and being a husband and a father, I would choose being a husband and a father. Now, the real world oftentimes doesn't make you make that choice, and so you get to have more than one value. But, again, the mental exercise is, if you had to choose, what would be your top value? Obviously, being a choral director for me and making music is a very high value for me on my list. It is the thing that I am the most passionate about in the entire world as it relates to profession and as it relates to my sense of expressing who I am into the world, is through my classroom, through the choirs that I stand in front of, through the things that I communicate to them about the world. It's a very high passion, but it is not as high of a value to me as being a good husband to my wife and being a good father who provides for my kids. So for me, happiness can be defined very simply, which is a state of being where you have achieved, in order, your values. You will become happier the more and more your values, as you've stated them to yourselves, reflect in your actual life. Unhappiness, unsettled people are people who have those things out of order, right? So they've got a value that they don't consider prime, occupying most of their time and energy. In other words, they're giving up something they value highly for something they value less highly. And that causes unhappiness, that causes regret, that causes resentment. So the step 2 large amount of work here that we're talking about is to arrange the values in order, and that's really important. And sometimes that would lead to, in fact, I would say all the time, especially for a young person, and I'm still working on this myself, is you might have to upend your whole life. When you realize that you are currently not living in alignment with your values, when you're honest with yourself, that might require turning over the entire apple cart and starting over. Sometimes you have to turn over everything in order to rearrange things, and don't sacrifice or give up things at the top of your list for things at the bottom. Like I said before, that it won't make you happy long term. And I see this a lot too. Even worse, don't sacrifice or give up things at the top of the list for things that aren't on the list at all. And I would say this took me probably 10 years, and I'm still working on that. In other words, if a committee meeting for one of your jobs that you're not required to go to is not on your list, but you feel pressured to do it, but making the choice to do it means you miss the one evening at home with your kids that you promised them that you'd have, you better be at home with your kids. Long term, those are the things that matter. Those are the things that when you go to your deathbed, you will not regret that time with them. Obviously, if you've got a requirement at your job, you got to do it. But if it's like me, you get asked sometimes to do a extra thing here and there. We'll talk about that later when we talk about balance. But you check your priority list. Is that time expendable to you on your list? So again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a guru, and I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I have sad days. I have sad moments. So take all this for what it is. But I am, again, really happy, not because I have always been, but because I was born that way, but because I've put myself through a process um, that that puts me in a position to hit those stumbling blocks in life and still be a happy person who can uh, get through it. And that's something that I learned to start that process from my mother, who was a very, very happy person despite a whole bunch of bad stuff that happened to her. So I think that these are an important framework for being happy. And then talking to people about happiness is also tricky, because most people's reaction would be, well, happiness is defined differently by different people. And I would say, yeah, in a sense, but not really. I disagree with that idea, in that would everybody's list of values be different? Absolutely. That's kind of the point. That's why you got to look at your own list of values and arrange them, upend your life, put them in order, live a life that reflects those values. You then are living with integrity. You are who you say you are. The things that you're claiming are important actually bear themselves out in your life, at which point you will be happy. Now, does that look different for everyone? Yes, it does, but I still think you can fit that into the same framework of what happiness is. So kind of the bottom line on this topic, as the definition of happiness, I'm setting forth this idea for you, that it is, again, the state of being where your values and your actual life are in line. Happiness, that feeling of content and peace that comes from that, is a byproduct of that thoughtful and intuitive, but also intentional action. And so, again, tying this back into my original inspiration for writing and talking about this topic is that teen suicide thing. But I think that plays into us as adults and teachers too. I think the teen years are risky because there's this huge goal to achievement gap, where the goals are in their face all the time on social media, right? I mean, they see their Instagrams of their friends and the prettiest pictures of themselves, and then they look in the mirror when they haven't put makeup on or haven't worn the coolest outfit, and they compare the best of their friends to the worst of themselves. And we do that to ourselves too as choral directors. I mean, let's be honest, admit it. You look at the video that the choir director in the neighboring town puts up on their Facebook page of the best moment their choir sang that whole semester. And then you go to school the next day and you see your choir trying to struggle through something. And you compare the best of theirs to the worst of yours. That's not fair, but we do it to ourselves all the time. So we all have this Insta-worthy picture of what we want our life to look like, not realizing that maybe 20 years away, like that might be a 20-year goal for you. And being able to look at that long game, looking at the long term, that is extremely important to happiness, is to reject the idea that we are needing it now. So as we move into the next topic here in a second, we're going to take a break. I'm going to be able to talk to some of my sponsors, or talk about some of my sponsors, and we'll move into the topic next of the health side of happiness. What kinds of things can we do to take care of our health, which should be also pretty darn high on your list of priorities once you've made one and arranged it and organized it. I'm going to take a break and talk about Sight Reading Factory a little bit. They've been very, very generous to jump on board and support this show all the way from its first episode. And the thing that's exciting for me about having a sponsor like Sight Reading Factory is that I've been using them for 6 years or so, before I ever even started a podcast, and feeling my teaching go to another level. My stress level, my ability to have fun at work, everything that I do at school has been affected by Sight Reading Factory. I know that seems like it couldn't possibly be that big of a deal, but my goodness, if you don't have this program and a membership to this program, and one for your kids, your students, you don't have time to wait till next week. You need to get started with a daily regimen of ready-made exercises that you can do with your kids in 5 minutes. The reading ability, their ability to learn a piece of music quickly, you will see dividends. That is something that has been very, very clear to me over the years. And when I switched from being a work on sight reading once a week for 20 or 30 minutes type of teacher when I first started out to being an everyday for 5 to 10 minutes type of person, I used that time to teach, of course, literacy, but also music theory, vocal technique, tone production, blend, balance, all of the different things that are basics in what we do with Sight Reading Factory at the beginning of every class. And we can tailor it exactly to the choir. We can tailor it to certain techniques and fundamentals that we want to learn. It's just an awesome tool, and you don't have to print out all those pieces of music to pass out every single day and then recycle it. So do yourself a favor, do the squirrels a favor. Don't be printing out too many pieces of paper, and just go project Sight Reading Factory up on the screen. If you're in one of those one-to-one schools where they can each have their own device, you get each kid a membership. They can be practicing, they can be doing assignments. It's really an awesome program, and I'm proud to call them one of our sponsors on the show. So thanks to Sight Reading Factory, and when you go out and you make that purchase for sightreadingfactory.com, put in promo code Choralosophy, you're going to get a 10% discount, and you are going to see your kids' sight reading improve with that daily regimen. In talking about health, I first want to recognize that for everybody, quote, health, unquote, is a different issue. For some people, it might be smoking. It could be eating junk food or low quality, non-nutritious food that makes you feel bad later, and then it affects your teaching. It could be mental health. Maybe there's something that you're struggling with, something that you're seeking help for, that affects your job, affects your ability to do your job. So I want to make sure that that everybody knows that I understand that health isn't the same. Doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. And so when I talk about health, the only thing I can speak with authority on is what that means for me. And for me, that's been exercise and managing my weight. And so I don't want to make this a weight loss episode to a podcast, but for me, when I talk about health, that's what I mean. I always tell people, especially if they've met me within the last 3 years, when I've done a good job of maintaining my health and my weight, that my entire adult life, up until probably about age 36, I've been somewhere between, well, not just adult life, my goodness, ever since birth, have been somewhere between pudgy and obese. And of course, I use that term in the clinical sense, meaning of very high risk of all kinds of health problems. And I was once told by a doctor when I was 30, that if I want to see 40, my cholesterol needs to change radically. And that was one wake-up call, but I still didn't get my act together. I mean, it took years after that point. So when I talk about making changes to my health routine, that's what it means for me. But I want you to feel free to email me at choralosophy@gmail.com and share your story. And I'd like to, in future episodes, be able to look back on past episodes and viewer mail and commentary. So feel free to do that and reach out. But the story I want to tell about this is relatively short. My first attempt ever to get myself under control came in college when I was probably, I don't know. Do I say this? Can I be vulnerable in our first episode? Yeah. No. Whatever. I'll just do it. I was 260 pounds, and I'm only 5'11". If you've met me in person, I'm an average height person. So I was a big dude in college. I ate all the foods. If I saw it and I was hungry, I just ate it. And I knew it was not smart. I knew it was not what I should be doing. But my impulse control was very low. My ability to have a thought about what I wanted to do and then actually achieve it was very low. And just like I was talking about in the last segment, my values were not in line with my life at all. In other words, I would tell people that I wanted to be healthy, but then when it came time to actually doing it, I was out of alignment. I was saying things were important, but then not living up to them. And that led to some pretty bad health decisions in my young life. Going back even further, I was an athlete all through childhood. I played varsity sports in high school, was very active, was exercising, running a lot, still kind of pudgy. I was pretty pudgy in high school, but I was at least in shape. I was physically fit, with just an extra layer to love, right? Um, so I felt pretty good. The problem was when I went to college, the sports stopped, but the eating habits didn't. And I ballooned, to be honest. It was bad. Um, and I made an attempt to get that under control in college. And this was a project that I did in a class. I think it was a music education class, actually, where I had a professor who was like a graduate assistant back then at the time. His name's D. Romines. If anybody out there knows D, I'm not sure where he is now. I think he's in Georgia. I don't have him on my Facebook. So if anybody knows D. Romines, tell him I mentioned him and shouted him out on my show, because it was a great class. And I ended up losing, I think, 60 pounds, maybe 50, as a result of this class project, which was really pretty cool. But it was my first time actually as an adult-ish, to learn that I could control my fate, that I could do something about it. The assignment was that as teachers, teachers of any kind, we are successful only if and when we can manage our time and we can manage our priorities. So he gave us the assignment of writing down something that we feel like is not under control in our life. In other words, we can't control our schedule, even though we want to, on a certain issue or a topic. And he said, put in place plans to fix that. And then afterwards, your job is to write a report on it. Well, all of a sudden that put my whole situation in perspective as far as it had a structure. So I didn't even have to think about it for 5 minutes. I wrote down the topic that I will talk about is in this project was going to be my exercise. I didn't say my weight. I said, I need to exercise more. I know I should be, and I just don't. So over the course of that 8 weeks, I started going to the gym, started exercising, and of course, logging my time was very helpful, because it helped. I felt accountable to the time, because if I didn't go exercise, then I didn't get to write anything down. And so that kind of kick-started my desire to be healthy. Now that lasted for a couple of years, during that time I met Beth, my wife, who you're going to meet here in a little bit on the show. She made me very happy, made me feel very safe and secure. And of course, I immediately started telling myself that I needed to be spending as much time with her as possible, which is true in a sense. But the result of that was that I stopped exercising. I gained almost all the weight back. I became quite unhealthy again, and that only took, after a year and a half of work to get in shape. You can get out of shape in a few months. And so I did that. And of course, then set in another 10 years or so of my life of a very fixed mindset. You guys have all probably read the book about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. I became very fixed mindset about my weight and my health and my exercise, because I had had this experience as a young person where I had worked really hard to get somewhere and then failed. And so as one of the things that you learn about growth mindset and fixed mindset is that oftentimes smart people, the smarter you are, the worse you are when you get into a fixed mindset, because you can reason your way out of ever changing. And I had done that. I had come up with all kinds of really impressive sounding on paper excuses for why being fit was just never going to be in the cards for me. Some people can do that, but genetically I can't do that. I've got this problem. I've got this barrier in my way. I was starting out a career teaching high school choir, and I needed to devote a bunch of time to that. I didn't have time to go to the gym anymore. I was a new dad. That was a big one. I was telling myself that, no, your priority is being home for your children. And so after school's over, you've already been gone a lot. You've got to go home. You've got to hang out with your kids. Okay. Years went along, and it was getting worse. I was in moments of vulnerability with my wife where she acknowledged and admitted that it really frustrates her that she works so hard on her health and her appearance, and I don't do anything on mine. She loved me, she said, but it's frustrating for her. And that was a kick in the gut because it's not something you want to hear, but it was the truth, and I appreciated it. And then I started thinking about my health and my life differently. I started thinking about that fixed mindset related to not having time to go to the gym, not having time to put my health at the top of my priority list. I thought, with the body mass index that I currently have, what is my life expectancy? What if I invested an hour a day to change my body composition to a place where I am at lower risk of early onset diseases that might end my life early? What if that hour a day could be the difference between me getting to be a grandpa and not? What if that hour a day would make me still around to be a helpful father to my kids when they are adults? And that really changed my perspective. I just made the decision at about age 36 that I was going to do that every single day. And because I'm an obsessive, kind of intense personality, I knew that it needed to be every day. I was not going to be successful like I had tried in the past of doing a moderate approach to health. I knew that I needed to either dive in all the way, or I would fail. And so far, that has been the case. That has been true. I go every single day, even if I have to get up early or I have to go late after an all-state choir rehearsal. I get there. I figure out a way to get there. There are exceptions, I guess, if I do truly have a 13-hour solid day. And choir directors, we sometimes have those. But those are the only days that I miss. And then I make sure that I never miss 2 days in a row, if that happens. And I make that a priority. And sometimes that means I have to say no to a meeting. Sometimes that means I have to say no to a phone call, or sometimes a student who asks me to stay after school to practice something. And I felt guilty about that at first. But then as I started to do it, and I started to actually make that commitment and make that time sacred, I started realizing all the other benefits that I hadn't realized. I was working more efficiently. I was working more quickly. When I did get home to see my kids, I had the energy to actually play with them, actually wrestle around on the floor with my son. And my daughter really liked to be picked up and carried around on my back, and all the things that I could do only on Saturdays before, now I can still do at 5 o'clock when I get home from the gym. Because even though I've just exercised vigorously for an hour, I have more energy than when I wasn't. So I was better at home. I was better at work. I was coming to work in the morning with better sleep. All of the things that I didn't even know would be benefits ended up being benefits. And so my encouragement to you from my story is to take some similar lessons and apply them to whatever it is that is your health challenge. Find something that you could do for a defined amount of time. For me, it's an hour at the gym. For you, it could be a 30-minute meditation if you've got different types of cognitive behavioral therapies that you need to engage in for your mental stability and well-being. I support you in all of those things. Those are things that if you need somebody to tell you that you deserve that time for yourself, here's me saying it. You've got to do that for yourself. Everyone who you live around and everyone who depends on you will be better off when you're better off. So now we're going to move into the topic of balance in the work to home life and what ratio feels balanced to you. And in order for me to do that, it would only make sense to bring on my first guest on the show. I spoke earlier about aligning your values. And so I thought for my first guest, I should bring on my first value. And that is my wife, Beth, who's here to talk to me and talk to you as we discuss this idea of a choir director with all of the hours that we work and all of the extra time we have to put in to do our job well, how does that affect our home life? So we thought it would be kind of a fun idea to tell a little bit of our story as a couple who has been together for over 10 years and has kids and very busy with our own teaching and
Almost
working.
14 years, in fact.
Well, together, yes, but
Right.
married for over 10 years. And bring her on and let her tell her side of things, because if we're going to discuss balance, then that's a hard thing to talk about with only one person, because you've got to balance with other people. So Beth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for being my very first guest.
It's exciting.
It's a day that will live in infamy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why don't you share some of your perspective, how being married to a choir director felt in the beginning?
Okay. Yeah. We spoke about this a little bit the other day, and I think it was good to talk about a little bit, just so I could kind of jog my memory about, what it was really like then. And I would have to say that, finding balance is always a work in progress. It's always something that we're both striving towards. And I would say in the beginning, you were in a position where you were trying to figure out how you wanted your classroom to run and how you wanted that to look like. And you were really focusing on that a lot, focusing on your career a lot. And you were spending a lot of your own personal time making things roll. And I remember feeling, because I am a musician, I remember feeling, supportive of that and wanting you to be successful, but also as a new mom, feeling a little bit of resentment that you weren't there. You weren't there when I was home alone with a new baby. And I remember, taking our daughter at the time, who's very young, to the park by myself and trying to have perspective, thinking, okay, my husband's working towards something that's very important to him, but here I am alone on this, kite day with our young child, and I'm alone. And so it was tough. It was tough in the beginning. And I feel you have definitely grown over time. You have definitely progressed. You've definitely found more balance. And do you want me to go on and talk more about that, or do you have specific questions?
Well, eventually, we'll get further into the history of how we achieved a better balance over time. But one of the things I thought I'd point out is you mentioned that I've gotten better at balancing, and for the directors who are listening to the show, one of the critical elements I see from my perspective of achieving better balance is that early on in my career, it took me longer with my choirs to get the desired effect, to get the result I wanted. As you get better at the job, you can take your work home less with you. You can get more done in the amount of time that you have. You can start to anticipate what's going to come up next week, what's going to come up next month, how long it's going to take for the choir to learn something or to get something fine-tuned. So I think that's an aspect of it too, and we'll probably talk about that in future episodes.
Well, that just takes time for a director to get to the point where they're more efficient at selecting music and whatnot.
And also, I'll point out, if you hear a rumbling in the background, that is us achieving balance in our home life as our children play fetch with the dog upstairs.
Yes.
So apologies for that. But,
it's real life.
Yes, it's real life.
Hashtag real life.
Yes, and we are achieving balance while recording a podcast episode, all in one. So all right, Beth. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about some of the things that, as our marriage progressed and as our kids started to grow up, what were some of the benefits, as you saw it, of working towards that better balance?
The benefits are some of the variables that changed that.
Whatever you want to talk about.
Okay. I would have to say a pivotal moment in our marriage and in our careers and our home life was when you decided to make fitness a priority for you, physical fitness. And I know that sounds so cheesy, but the whole mind-body connection is so huge. And I remember I was really into the gym at the time, and I was always trying to convince you to come. And this was, after I'd had Clara, and you were just kind of not interested in that. And
I didn't think I had time.
you didn't think you had time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you didn't want to make time. And then an opportunity came along where they opened a new gym that was closer. It was right on your path home. And you thought, maybe we'll join this new gym and I can get in there and do a workout on my way home, and then I can find time. And so you had to do that on your time. It couldn't come from anyone else. And so you made that commitment, and that meant that we had to have, because I teach in the afternoons. I'm a voice teacher in the afternoons, and Chris was always running home from school to watch the kids while I was teaching. And so we had to then hire a nanny to watch our children while Chris then went to the gym and then came home. So I would say that was a small investment, but a huge payout in the long run, because it gave you time. It gave you time to exercise, and you had more energy, and it's gotten better in the long run. You're more alert mentally. I remember prior to that, you would come home and you would just sit on the couch and zone out, and you wouldn't get up. And you were physically and mentally exhausted. And if I would talk to you, it would take forever to get your attention.
Teaching took everything out of me.
Everything. And there was no time to dad.
Yeah, to the point where I couldn't be a really good dad when I got home. And of course, the solutions to that Beth just mentioned, to a lot of people, if you're like me, those solutions seemed counterintuitive, meaning I'm feeling like I don't have enough energy and I don't have enough time. And of course, all teachers, we feel like we don't have enough money. So we took the solution where I invested more time and more money in my health.
But the payout
and then the result ended up being, again, it's counterintuitive, because if you're too tired when you get home from teaching, the last thing you think you could do is go to the gym and exercise vigorously for an hour. And if you've got a childcare issue that you got to figure out how to do that. But it's a classic example of that people show on. There's probably tons of YouTube videos of it where you put the big rocks that are your priority in the jar, and then you think it's full, but then you pour sand in, and then it fills up all the cracks, and you still think it's full, and then they pour water in, and then you realize how much actual space is in there. If you put in those big rocks first, those big high priorities, then your life you will figure out a way to fit everything else into your life. So
and health is a huge thing. Huge.
It makes you better at all the other things you do.
Yeah. While we're not, promoting a gym here, we don't have a gym as a sponsor. That's not yet. Maybe that's not there. But the point is, though, finding time, whether that means, doing exercise at home. And I've transferred, I got sick of the gym rat culture. I now work out at home, but I make it a priority. I make it a part of my day. And whenever I do that, I feel so much better physically, mentally. I'm a better mom. I'm a better teacher. I'm better at all the things. And I noticed that in you, and it's gotten better over time, and it's changed who you are as a person inside and outside. And so I would say that shifted who you were. That was very pivotal. And you were able to then prioritize all your other things kind of around that. That was just a big thing. That was a big benchmark in our lives. So
yeah, I think one of the things that choir directors that I speak to struggle with the most in this area is the idea of bringing the work home, is actually spending time at home on things that really should be done at school. And I think for me, the energy, the increased energy that I've gotten by making the decision to spend my home time with my kids. Of course, I'm a little bit unique in the sense that my school is not my only job. I work with Contrai, and I've spent the last 20 years working in churches. And so it's not like I don't do any work while at home. And of course, now starting this podcast, that's more work.
You actually do a lot of work at home.
Right.
But I feel like you work more efficiently when you do it.
Right. And so that was kind of the point I was leading up to, was that when I got my priorities lined up, it left more room for those other things, like my outside jobs. My full-time job, of course, is a high school. And I think when I say taking work home, what I really mean is choir directors, let's stop spending 3 hours after school recording practice tracks for your kids.
Yeah, don't do that.
Instead, get Sight Reading Factory,
right,
and use my promo code. But get Sight Reading Factory and do a better job than whatever you're doing right now of teaching the kids to read the music.
Yeah.
So that they don't need practice tracks. If you feel like you are being bogged down by the job you're doing at your school, then maybe rethink how you do it. And that's not intended to be a diss or an insult or anything like that. But when I was a young teacher, I was working way harder to do my job, score prep, having to study the music. And in teaching more efficiently, I've also become a better musician.
Yeah, you teaching sight reading.
Oh, my ability to hear the music playing in my head so that I don't have to take the music home anymore and study it and learn it. This is kind of what I mean when I say working efficiently, working smarter, so that you don't have to work as hard, and that allows time for the exercise that you need to do, especially if you're one of those young teachers. You're 25, you think this is not going to matter to you, but oh my goodness, when you're my age, this gets so much harder. Like every choice you make with your diet, with your exercise, is going to pay real dividends or costs to you as you age. And so, making the investment early in a routine to get your priorities in line so that your health and your mental well-being is high on your list is huge. So Beth, any parting thoughts for the Choirosophy audience on anything related to balance and home life?
I feel like we kind of just scratched the surface of it, but I would say that set your priorities and be true to what those priorities are. Like if your family truly is one of your priorities, don't spend your whole life at your school. Try to tweak things a little bit, like you said. And if you want to live a long, healthy, happy life, make your own health and your own mental health a priority. Take care of yourself. Make time to take care of yourself. I think that is something that is preached all the time. It's very cliche, but it's so true. And I think that you are definitely still a work in progress, but you're getting so much better. You're getting so much better at all of those things.
Why do I feel like a puppy who's just been praised?
I just mean we all are works in progress, but you're so much better now. And I love that you're making that effort. I love that you're making that effort to do better and be better as a dad and at home and helping run the house. And it really shows. And I think that step one for you was making a commitment to yourself, making time for yourself to take care of yourself.
That I agree. And you touched on something when you said that all of us are works in progress. I think that is actually acknowledging that is the first step for everybody.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say this. I'm so tired of hearing people talk about how everyone should just love themselves just the way they are. No, try to be better. If I can understand that making a distinction between loving yourself for who you are, as long as there is a caveat that where you say, but I could be better. I could be better tomorrow, and I'm going to work towards that.
Here's the mental shift.
I agree.
Love yourself enough to want to be better.
Boom.
It's not about being.
Yes, that's it.
It's not about being dissatisfied with who you are, but saying, I like me, but I think I could be better in this way, and I'm going to love and take care of myself in this way. So it's not about not loving yourself, disloving yourself. That's not a word.
It could be if you believe in yourself.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Beth, for coming on and helping me launch this show, and I'm really excited. And we're going to be hearing from Beth again in the very near future. My plan is to bring her on for little 2 to 3 minute segments on future episodes. Her passion is vocal pedagogy, and I think she's really, really good at it. And her students are phenomenal singers, and they grow and they learn so much. So I've asked her to start digging up just interesting things about the voice that she thinks every choir director should know. Because, of course, we don't typically spend all of our nerding time studying that particular aspect of what we do. But the reality is we are almost always the only voice teacher our kids will ever have. in the choir rehearsal. So I've asked Beth to put together little snippets of knowledge that will be helpful, and we're going to stick those in as a recurring segment in future episodes. So I really appreciate her coming on, and we hope to see you next time on the Choralosophy Podcast.